Military officers in Burkina Faso have announced the removal of the country's president, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, 8 months after he came into power through a coup. As a result of accusations made by supporters of Burkina Faso's new coup leader that France was harboring the country's ousted interim president, angry protesters have stormed the French embassy in the capital of Ouagadougou. Let's find out about the long history of coups in Burkina Faso. We're joined by Thomas Lessafre, a researcher at the African School of Leadership. Thomas, eternally grateful for your patience with us. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. One would be forgiven if you are some 20 years, if you will, for thinking that Burkina Faso has always been in turmoil, but there was a time where there was a sense of stability and the country was working, and if not thriving. Maybe let's just go back to that Burkina Faso and just remind our viewers in terms of what country we are talking about.
Yeah, Burkina Faso is originally a country that was named Haute-Volta, but Thomas Sankara, a captain from the Burkina Faso army, decided to take power and rename it. Now what you have is you have situations where the current president, the previous president called Kabore, was elected after 27 years of dictatorship by Blaise Compaoré. Blaise Compaoré was highly supported by the French. He made the coup against Thomas Sankara, and then Burkina Faso people decided to take him out of power, leading a revolution that led to an elections, and President Kabore was elected. 8 months ago, you had a putsch in the army, and the army decided to seize power, saying that they do not agree with the civilian rulers, and saying that the civilian rulers are not able to stop and prevent what's happening in the north of the country. And I think that's really where the situation is highly alarming. You have a big security issues in Burkina Faso. More than 40% of the territory now is under control of jihadist group. So the two main jihadist groups, they are affiliated to Al-Qaeda in Sahel and the Islamic State. 40% of the territory is under their control, which led to 2 million people being displaced. So something like 10% of the population. So the situation is really complex now, with an emergence of a new putsch against the Damiba, the president that took power in January. And yeah, we're yet to see what's going to happen.
Sure. You mentioned the Sahel, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Chad, that is faced by insurgency, and there's instability where security is concerned. What is fueling that? Who is funding the people who are or who have lodged this insurgency and creating this instability?
Yeah, well, the situation in all the Sahel region is complex. Sahel, coastal in Arabic, which really tells you like how articulated it is to the Sahara Desert. So it's a region that always has been under different influences, and jihad is not really a new form of politics in Sahel. Prior to colonial time, the region was under different Islamic states. Some of them practiced slavery. They used to be controlling the exchange between the Sahara Desert and the forest, the kingdom of the forest in West Africa and Central Africa. So the war in Sahel speaks really about regional dynamics more than state dynamics. So if you want to understand how jihadist groups have emerged in the region, you need to look back a bit in history and see that the Sahel was controlled by strongmen as Compaoré, as we spoke before, but also Gaddafi. And since like those strongmen left, you have the emergence of global Islamic network. I would call them like this: Islamic State and Al-Qaeda especially. They reach out to the north of Burkina Faso. They took a city, for instance, named Djibo City, and now they control big part of the territory, which means that Burkinabe people live in high insecurity. There's a lot of anger, for instance. Civilians were not really able to stop and prevent the rise of that jihad in the north, and officials of the army believe that they can do better. However, it's highly unlikely that they sort out the situation without politically trying to understand where that came from, and they need to both fight on the field and find political solutions.
And then in enters the French element. To your understanding, at least, how should we understand, or what is it that you understand of the relationship between the French and Burkina Faso?
So it's a long history, right? The French colonized Burkina Faso at the time called Haute-Volta in the 19th century. And obviously, Burkina got its independence in 1960, but the French kept a really strong hold on his leadership until Thomas Sankara took power and really started to lead the nation on its own interest. What you have now is since in 2011, French decided to fight back in the Sahel against those jihadist groups. They mainly were in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. But since 2020, you had coup d'etat in Mali that decided that the French are not welcomed anymore and that they prefer to work with Russians. So the French army had to leave, failing to deliver the promise of bringing back security in the regions. So they moved back to Burkina Faso and Niger, where they continue the fight that side. So in order to fight against the insurrections, they have established some camp where they trained the Burkina army and Burkinabe soldiers. And right now, what we think is that the previous president Damiba is refugee in one of those camps. So he's refugee in a camp where you have like Burkinabe army and the French army, so making obviously the situation really tense. He claimed that he is not in any of those camps. He claimed that he's somewhere else and is ready to fight back. But many people in the street in Ouagadougou believe that he is protected by the French. We need to understand that 45% of the population of Burkina Faso is under 15 years old, right? So they do not always they do not always like fully understand what's the situation. Then rumors are spreading really fast on social media. We know that there is a sort of information war in those countries now between Russia saying that the French are responsible for most of the Sahel issues and the French claiming that they're not. So far, we don't know where the previous president is. What we can say is that the French army didn't interfere when the embassy was set on fire. So yesterday night, the embassy was set on fire by protesters. The French army didn't interfere, even if they have some men on the field. And we don't know if the current coup have to do with France. We don't know yet where is the previous president. So the situation is really blurry. But we know that the French influence is growing smaller and smaller in those countries.
To that point, should France not extract itself from these countries where they're clearly not welcome? You mentioned what happened in Mali just a short while ago when people took to the streets, also not wanting France involved in the country. And here we also see in Burkina Faso, you say, what, 45% or 40% of the population is under the age of 15 and may not know what is happening, but they clearly know enough to know that they do not want the French there.
So it seems like this is the sense of history. France is definitely leaving the region. I would say that I'm happy about it if it lets like strong power. But the situation is more that we have a state that have failed. And that failed to deliver security to their populations. If you look at the Sahel, what you see is that the French army have failed to stabilize the region for 8 years, in both Mali, as I said, and Burkina Faso. And military regime have also failed to stabilize the region. In Mali, right now, you don't have a more stable situation, even if the government is under the head of independent military rulers that have kicked out France. Now, Burkina Faso is also falling inside the same situation where a new ruler emerged and will probably say that France will have to leave, or at least that they want more capacity to fight in the north, and that might lead them to call for Russia's intervention, for instance. The situation in Sahel is a security deadlock. 40% of the territory is controlled by jihadist group as we speak. And for sure, France has failed to help those countries, but will they be able to receive help? Will they be able to sort out the situation themselves, or will they have to call for another strong imperialist power, as Russia has demonstrated to be in Ukraine? I don't know. What I know is that new global jihadist networks are reaching the continent, and that seems to be really strong, and they highlight the weakness of the states that side.
Who benefits from instability, or who benefits from conflict, especially in these countries?
It's difficult to say. I think the failure of the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq has made the organization to reorganize. And they have found a really fertile ground in Sahel because there's a really little capacity to find jobs. So as I said, 45% of the population is under 15 years old, and they don't really see themselves. They don't see a future for themselves. The countries aren't bringing enough jobs for the population. The economy is not really doing well. So they find themselves in a situation when they have to trade. They prefer to join such groups that can pay a little bit better than being homeless, for instance. So who benefit really? It's difficult to say. But I think the youth really are the one that are under really strongly difficult situations and might be interested to join such groups, even if they will not bring developments and they will not bring jobs.
Thomas Lessafre is a researcher at the African School of Leadership. Thank you.